She sat at the long mahogany table, her husband's gaze fixed on Lady Cordelia's smile, and Seraphina felt herself disappear. The candlelight flickered across crystal glasses and silverware, casting soft shadows on the faces of 12 dinner guests. Laughter rose and fell around her like music she was not meant to hear. At the head of the table sat the Duke of Ravenscroft, her husband of 1 month, his dark hair brushed back from a face that could have been carved from winter stone. He did not look at her. He had not looked at her all evening. Lady Cordelia leaned closer to him, her gown the color of spilled wine, her gloved fingers resting on his sleeve with the confidence of a woman who had known him long before a stranger bride arrived at Ravenscroft Hall. "Do you remember the summer at Thornfield Cassion?" Cordelia's voice was honeyed and loud enough to carry. "You promised me the first dance at the midsummer ball. You never broke a promise back then." The Duke's lips moved into something that was almost a smile. "I remember." Seraphina's fingers tightened around the stem of her untouched wine glass. She waited for him to glance her way, to include her in the conversation, to acknowledge that she existed at his table in his home, wearing his ring. He did not. A footman refilled Cordelia's glass. Seraphina's remained empty. Another guest, a baroness whose name Seraphina could not remember, turned to her with a thin smile. "And how are you settling into Ravenscroft, your grace? It must feel very grand after everything." The pause was deliberate. After everything. After her father's trial. After the accusations of treason that had splashed across every newspaper in England. After the prison cell and the cold offer of salvation. Seraphina lifted her chin. "Ravenscroft is beautiful. I am grateful for the kindness shown to me here." It was a lie wrapped in silk. No kindness had been shown, only distance colder than the North Sea. Cordelia laughed softly. "Grateful, what a perfect word. I do hope you spend every day being properly grateful, my dear. Some doors open only once and only for the most fortunate." The Duke said nothing. His silence was a blade. Seraphina placed her napkin beside her plate, rose quietly, and excused herself. She walked from the dining room with her spine straight, the whispers already sprouting behind her like weeds after rain. No one called her back, least of all her husband. She climbed the grand staircase alone, her hand trailing the banister, and when she reached her bedchamber in the east wing, she locked the door and let the tears fall. 1 month earlier she had been Seraphina Greaves, daughter of a disgraced merchant, sitting on a wooden bench in the Tower of London while her father awaited sentencing. The cell had smelled of damp stone and despair. Her father's voice, hoarse from begging, still echoed in her memory. "I did nothing wrong, child. I swear it. The ship was sound when it left port. I would never have sent men to their deaths." But the evidence had been stacked against him. Faulty timber, falsified inspection reports, a sunken vessel carrying 30 souls, including the Duke of Ravenscroft's younger sister, Lady Alowen. The nation demanded blood. And then the Duke himself had come. He had appeared in the narrow corridor outside her father's cell like a figure from a dark dream. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black coat immaculate, his gray eyes empty of anything human. He had looked at her as one might look at a debt waiting to be collected. "You are Seraphina Greaves." "I am." "Your father will hang within the fortnight, unless I intervene." Her heart had lurched. "You can save him." "I can. I have influence with the Admiralty. I can arrange for his sentence to be commuted to transportation. He will live, though he will never return to England." She had clutched the iron bars. "What must I do?" The Duke had not blinked. "You will marry me, tomorrow. You will come to Ravenscroft and you will remain there as my wife. In exchange, your father breathes." She had searched his face for pity, for duty, for any shred of human feeling. There was none, but she had no choice. A father's life dangled before her. She had whispered yes, and the very next morning a cold ceremony had bound her to a stranger who did not meet her eyes. Now, a month later, she understood the truth her desperate heart had refused to see. She had not been saved. She had been collected. An object, a symbol, a silent ghost in a grand house that would never be her home. The days after the dinner party grew no warmer. Serafina woke each morning in her lavish chamber, a room decorated in pale blue silk with views of the sprawling gardens. A maid named Mary brought her tea and helped her dress, her kind eyes the only softness in the house. The Duke had assigned her this room on the farthest wing from his own. She had never seen his private chambers. She did not know if he slept there or somewhere else entirely. She tried. On the third morning of her second week, she had risen early and made her way to the kitchens, asking the cook to prepare a tray with fresh bread, butter, and hot coffee. She carried it herself to the Duke's study and knocked softly. "Enter." She pushed the door open with her hip, balancing the tray, a hopeful smile ready on her lips. He sat behind a massive oak desk, papers spread before him, his white shirt open at the collar. He looked up and his expression did not change. "I thought you might like some breakfast," she said. "You work so hard." He glanced at the tray as if she had brought him a dead bird. "I have already eaten. Leave it on the sideboard." She placed it down, her hands trembling slightly. "Cassian, I wondered if we might walk the gardens later. The roses are blooming and I thought. I have meetings all day, perhaps another time." Another time never came. She tried again. She learned his favorite books and left one on his desk with a ribbon marking a passage she thought he might enjoy. The book was returned to the library the next day, the ribbon gone, no note. She wore a new gown, deep green, that matched her eyes and came down for dinner hopping for a glance of approval. He greeted their guests, a visiting earl and his wife, and did not once look her way. The earl's wife whispered to her husband, "She tries so hard, poor thing. One almost feels sorry for her." Serafina heard. She stopped wearing the green gown. The turning point came with the arrival of Lord Julian Ashby. Julian was the Duke's closest friend from their university days, a cheerful, open-faced man with sandy hair and a laugh that filled rooms. He arrived on a rainy afternoon, shaking water from his coat, and when he saw Serafina in the entrance hall, he bowed with genuine warmth. "You must be the new Duchess. I have heard almost nothing about you, which means Cassian is being his usual secretive self. I am Julian. You look far too kind for this mausoleum of a house." She could not help but smile. It was the first smile she had worn in weeks. Julian stayed for a fortnight. He sought her out at breakfast, asked about her interests, and discovered she loved poetry and gardening. He challenged her to chess in the library and lost graciously, laughing at his own mistakes. He walked with her through the gardens, pointing out birds and flowers, never once making her feel like a stranger. One afternoon, they were in the village just beyond the estate gates. Serafina had found a dilapidated schoolhouse, its roof sagging, its windows boarded. She had stood before it with a strange ache in her chest. "This place should be full of children," she said. Julian kicked a loose stone. "Then fill it. You are the Duchess of Ravencroft. Use your position. I will help you." And so the project began. She spent her days in the village, hearing carpenters, scrubbing floors, gathering books and slates. Julian worked beside her, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand. The villagers began to smile when they saw her. The children called her Lady Sira and brought her wildflowers. She was happy, or something close to it. The Duke noticed her absence. It happened on the 9th day of Julian's visit. Cassian stood at the window of his study, watching the drive. Serafina and Julian were returning from the village, their clothes dusty, their faces flushed with laughter. She held a small bouquet of daisies a child had given her. Julian said something that made her laugh, her head tilting back, the sound drifting up to the window like a bell. Cassian's jaw tightened. His hand, resting on the windowsill, curled into a fist. When Julian joined him later for brandy, Cassian's voice was clipped. You spend a great deal of time with my wife." Julian raised an eyebrow. "She is good company, you should try it sometime." "She is my wife, not your distraction." "Then distract her yourself." "She has been lonely since the day she arrived. Everyone sees it. The servants talk, the village talks. You brought her here and then abandoned her." The Duke's glass hit the table with a sharp crack. "You know nothing of what I brought her here for." "Then tell me." Silence. Cashin turned away, his shoulders rigid. Julian shook his head and left the room. Serafina's fragile hope did not die all at once. It cracked slowly, like thin ice under a heavy boot. A week after Julian's departure, Lady Cordelia returned. She arrived with a party of fashionable friends for a weekend of riding and picnics. Serafina was informed by a servant that she was expected to attend the outdoor luncheon. She dressed carefully, choosing a lavender gown, and walked to the garden pavilion with her heart pounding. The group was already seated when she arrived. Cordelia held court at the center, her parasol tilted elegantly. The Duke sat beside her, his expression unreadable. "Ah, the little Duchess arrives," Cordelia announced. "We were just discussing the Ashworth scandal. You remember that, don't you? The merchant who sold rotten timber and sent a ship to the bottom of the sea. Such a tragedy. All those lives lost, including sweet Lady Alowen. And your father was at the very heart of it, was he not?" The words fell like stones into still water. Conversations halted. Faces turned. Serafina's chest tightened. "My father was wrongly accused." Cordelia's smile sharpened. "Of course he was. They always are. Still, one cannot help but wonder if the apple falls far from the tree. Cashin, darling, do you not worry what people say about having such a woman beneath your roof?" The Duke did not answer. He took a slow sip of wine. Serafina waited for him to defend her, to say one word. A single syllable would have been enough. He said nothing. She turned and walked away through the rose garden, her lavender skirts catching on thorns. She did not cry. She had no tears left for him. That night she sat at the small writing desk in her room and composed a letter to her father, thousands of miles away in a penal colony where the sun burned and hope was rationed. "Dearest Papa, I do not know if this letter will ever reach you. I am writing from a house of marble and shadows, where I am called Duchess but treated as a ghost. I married to save you, and I do not regret that choice. But I did not know that survival could feel so much like drowning." She poured her heart onto the page, every ache, every silent supper, every cold glance from the man she had foolishly hoped might one day see her. When she finished, she folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. She did not send it. She could not bear for her father to know the cost of his life. From that day she stopped trying. She no longer brought breakfast trays. She no longer waited in the library hoping he would pass by. She no longer wore colors she thought he might like. She rose early, dressed in simple gowns, and went to the village school. She taught children their letters and numbers. She helped a young widow bake bread for the poor. She planted a garden behind the schoolhouse, her hands in the dirt, her heart slowly stitching itself back together with thread that did not depend on her husband's affection. The Duke began to notice the silence. Her chair at breakfast was empty. Her laugh no longer drifted from the garden. The servants spoke of her with warmth, their loyalty shifting. Mr. Finch, the steward, reported that Her Grace had repaired the school, organized a winter clothing drive, and was planning a harvest festival for the tenants. "She is well liked," Mr. Finch said carefully. "The villagers speak of her as if she were a saint." Cashin dismissed him with a wave, but that evening he found himself walking past her closed door. He paused, he listened. There was no sound. The jealousy he had felt watching her with Julian sharpened into something deeper. He began to watch her from windows, from doorways, from the shadows of his own house. He saw the way she smiled at the gardener's boy, the way she knelt to comfort a crying child in the village, the way she moved through the world with a quiet grace he had never earned. One night he entered her chamber while she was away. He did not know why. He told himself he was looking for evidence of something, anything to justify his distance. Instead, he found the letter in the drawer. He read her words, her loneliness, her fading hope, and for the first time in years, the Duke of Ravencroft felt something break inside his chest. He left the letter where he found it and walked to the east wing, to a door that had been locked for 7 years. He unlocked it and stepped inside. The room was a shrine. A young girl's portrait hung above the mantelpiece, her eyes bright, her smile frozen forever at 17. Elowen, his sister, the only person he had ever loved without condition. On a small table beneath the portrait lay a leather journal. He did not need to open it. He knew every word by heart. He had written it in the months after the ship sank, when grief had curdled into obsession. He had vowed to destroy the man responsible for Elowen's death, and when the law could not give him vengeance, he had found another way. He would take that man's daughter. He would make her his wife. She would live in his house, bear his name, and every day she would be reminded of her father's crime. But he had not expected Seraphina Greaves. He had not expected her quiet courage, her patient smile, her relentless kindness. He had not expected the way her absence now felt like a wound. He closed the journal and left the room. The lock clicked behind him, but the door in his heart refused to close. The village harvest festival arrived on a golden October afternoon. Seraphina had spent weeks organizing it. Lanterns hung from trees. Long tables were laden with bread, cheese, and cider. A fiddler played near the bonfire, and children danced in clumsy circles. She moved among the villagers, laughing, her cheeks pink with cold and joy. Lord Julian Ashby returned for the occasion. He found her by the cider press and offered his arm. "You have accomplished a miracle, Your Grace. This village adores you." "They adore the cider," she said, but her eyes sparkled. He led her toward the dancing area. "One dance, for old times. I promise not to step on your toes." She laughed and let him pull her into the steps. They moved together easily, and for a few moments she forgot the shadow of Ravencroft Hall. She forgot the cold Duke and the locked door she had never dared to open. Cassian arrived late. He stood at the edge of the festival, his black coat blending into the dusk. He saw her dancing with Julian, her head thrown back, her hair loosening from its pins. Something hot and possessive flared in his chest. He crossed the green in long strides. The music faltered for a heartbeat. Dancers parted. "May I cut in?" His voice was smooth, but his eyes were hard. Julian hesitated, then stepped back with a bow. "Of course she is your wife." Seraphina's smile vanished. She stood still as Cassian took her hand and placed his other at her waist. The music resumed. They began to move. "I did not expect you to attend," she said quietly. "I did not expect my wife to be dancing with another man. Julian is your friend. He has been kind to me when no one else was." The words struck deep, but his face betrayed nothing. "I have been neglectful." She looked up sharply. "Neglectful? Cassian, you have made me invisible. You brought me to this house and treated me as if I were furniture. You let Lady Cordelia humiliate me. You never once defended me. And now you speak of neglect as if it were a minor fault." The dance slowed. Around them, the villagers watched with curious eyes. "I have my reasons," he said. "Then share them. For once, be honest with me." He could not. The truth was locked in that East Wing room, and he was too much of a coward to open it. "I cannot," he whispered. She pulled her hand from his grasp. "Then do not touch me again until you can." She walked away, her shoulders set, leaving him alone in the middle of the dance floor. The fiddler played on, but the music had lost its sweetness. She had known about the locked room since her first week at Ravencroft. The servants whispered about it. The East Wing corridor was forbidden, the door always shut. Mary had once crossed herself when they passed it. "That was Lady Elowen's room, Your Grace. The Duke keeps it as she left it. No one is permitted inside." Seraphina had respected the boundary. She understood grief well enough to leave it undisturbed. But after the festival, after his half-confession and her cold demand for honesty, something shifted inside her. She needed to know. One afternoon, when the Duke had ridden to the neighboring estate, she slipped into the east wing. The corridor was dark and dusty, the windows shuttered. Her candle flickered as she approached the door. She tried the handle, locked. But Mary had once mentioned the spare key, kept in a vase on the landing. Serafina found it, her fingers trembling, and slid it into the lock. The door swung open with a groan. The room was frozen in time. A canopied bed, a dressing table with silver brushes, a wardrobe still holding gowns of pale muslin, and above the mantelpiece, a portrait of a girl with laughing eyes and dark curls like her brother. Eloin. On the table below, a leather journal lay open. Serafina lifted it, her heart hammering. The handwriting was Cassian, sharp and furious. I will make him pay. His daughter will wear my ring and live in my house, and every day she will know that her presence is a punishment. She will be the living reminder of what her father stole from me. I will never love her. I will never forgive her. She will be my most beautiful revenge. The journal slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a sound like a death knell. Serafina stood frozen, the candle wax dripping onto her hand. The pain did not register. Nothing registered except the words she had just read. Revenge, punishment, never love. Her marriage had never been a bargain of mercy. It had been a sentence. She did not remember walking back to her chamber. She did not remember packing a small bag. She only remembered finding herself in the entrance hall as the Duke strode through the front door, his boots wet from the ride. He saw her face, he saw the bag in her hand, and he knew. You went into the room, he said. Yes. Serafina. You married me to punish me. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. You let me believe you had saved my father out of duty, out of some shred of decency. But you only saved him so you could own his daughter and make her suffer in his place. You are not a cold man, Cassian. You are a cruel one. He stepped toward her. Listen to me. No, I have listened to your silences for 2 months. I have endured your indifference and your friend's cruelty and the whispers of every guest who wonders why you keep a traitor's daughter under your roof. I will not listen anymore. I am leaving. You cannot leave. You are my wife. Then divorce me. Annul the marriage. I do not care. I would rather be poor and free than spend another night in a house built on your hatred. She walked past him, out the great doors, down the steps, into the cold dusk. He did not follow. He stood in the hall, the portrait of Eloin burning in his mind, and he let her go. She went to the only place that had ever felt like hers, the schoolhouse in the village. The children were gone. The room was cold and dim. She lit a single lantern, wrapped herself in a blanket she found in a cupboard, and sat on the floor with her back against the wall. The tears came then, ugly and wrenching, soaking the blanket. She cried for her father, for the girl in the portrait, for the foolish hope she had carried like a fragile flame. By morning her tears had dried. She rose, washed her face in the pump behind the building, and began to sweep the floor. The children would arrive soon. They needed her. That was enough. Julian found her 2 days later. He stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, his face tight with anger. I heard what he did. Serafina, I am so sorry. Do not be sorry, be here. Help me teach the younger ones their sums. He stayed. He did not speak of the Duke. But Cassian was not idle. That first night, after she walked out, he had returned to Eloin's room and sat on the dusty floor like a broken boy. He stared at the portrait and spoke to her as if she could hear. You would be ashamed of me, Lola. You were always the better part of our family. You loved everyone. You would have loved her too. And I have destroyed the only good thing that has come into my life since you left. He wept. The Duke of Ravencroft, who had not shed a tear since his sister's funeral, wept until his throat was raw. When the sun rose, He went to his study and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay a folder he had not touched in over a year, an investigation report, witness statements, a confession from a shipping rival who had tampered with the timber to ruin Greaves' reputation. The confession named the true culprit, a man who had fled to the continent, and it proved beyond doubt that Serafina's father was innocent. Cashin had received this evidence 3 weeks after his wedding. He had buried it. He had told himself it was too late, that the scandal would damage his name, that Serafina would hate him if she knew the truth of his original motives. He had chosen his own cowardice over her freedom. Now he gathered every page, mounted his horse, and rode for London. He presented the evidence to the King's Council. He called in every favor, spent every political coin he possessed. He secured a royal pardon for Harold Greaves and arranged for his immediate return from the penal colony. The process took 12 days. 12 days of sleepless nights, of legal battles, of staring at the ceiling and imagining her face. When the pardon was signed, he rode back to Ravencroft through a storm. The rain fell in silver sheets, turning the roads to mud. He did not stop. He reached the village as the church bell tolled midnight. The schoolhouse windows glowed faintly. She was still there. He dismounted, his coat soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He knocked on the door. She opened it, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, a candle in her hand. When she saw him, her face hardened. "Go away, Cashin. Please, 5 minutes. Then I will leave and never trouble you again if that is what you wish." She hesitated. The rain dripped from his chin. There was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not coldness, not distance, desperation. She stepped back and let him enter. He stood in the small room, water pooling at his feet. He looked at the chalkboard, the tiny desks, the drawings pinned to the walls. Her world, the world she had built without him. "Speak," she said. He drew a breath. "Your father is innocent, I have proof. I have known for over a year and I hid it from you. I married you to punish you for a crime he did not commit, and when I discovered the truth, I was too ashamed to set you free. I have spent the last 12 days in London securing his pardon. A ship is bringing him home. He will be in England within the month." The candle shook in her hand. You knew. All this time you knew my father was innocent and you let me believe he was guilty. You let me carry that shame, that grief, while you held the truth in your desk drawer. "Yes," his voice cracked. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I do not deserve it, but you deserve to know the whole truth. I loved my sister more than my own life. When she died, something in me died with her. I wanted someone to suffer the way I suffered. You were never supposed to be anything more than a target for my rage, but you became so much more. You became the air I did not know I needed. I watched you in the garden. I read your letter. I saw the way you loved the children, the way you loved this village, the way you loved a man who gave you nothing. And I knew I had made the worst mistake of my life." She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "You read my letter." "Yes, it broke me. You broke me, Serafina. I thought I was incapable of love. I was wrong. I loved alone, and I love you. I love you too late, but I love you with everything I have left." He sank to his knees in the puddle of rainwater, his proud head bowed. The Duke of Ravencroft, on his knees in a village schoolhouse, offering nothing but the shattered pieces of his heart. She stared at him. The rain beat against the roof. The candle flickered. "I do not know if I can trust you," she whispered. "I know. I will spend the rest of my life earning it if you let me. My father is truly coming home. Yes, he is free. You are free. If you want an annulment, I will grant it. If you want to never see me again, I will disappear. But if there is any part of you that still hopes, I will spend every day proving that my heart is yours." She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had ignored her, humiliated her, used her as a vessel for his vengeance. And yet, here he was, soaked and broken, telling her the truth at last. "I do not want an annulment," she said slowly. "I want a husband, a real one. Someone who will sit beside me at dinner, who will defend me against Cordelia and every other whisper, who will walk through the garden with me and tell me about Elowen. I want a partner, Cassian, not a master." He lifted his head, hope flickering in his gray eyes. "You will have all of that, I swear it." She extended her hand. He took it. His fingers cold and trembling, she helped him to his feet. "You will sleep on the floor tonight," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "You are dripping on my schoolroom." He almost laughed. It was a rusty, unfamiliar sound. "I have slept in worse places. And tomorrow you will help me paint the back wall. It needs a fresh coat." "I have never painted a wall in my life." "Then you will learn." He looked at her, this woman who had been his prisoner and had become his salvation. He did not deserve her, he knew that, but he would spend forever trying. The weeks that followed were not easy. Healing was not a straight road, but a winding path with stones and shadows. When Harold Greaves arrived at Ravencroft, frail and gray but alive, Seraphina ran into his arms and wept. Cassian stood at a distance, watching the reunion, his heart full and aching. He approached the old man later alone and offered a quiet apology that cost him more pride than any public confession. "I wronged you, sir. I wronged your daughter. I will spend my life making amends." Harold looked at him with tired eyes. "My daughter tells me you brought me home. That is a start." It was a start. Cassian kept his promises. He sat beside Seraphina at every dinner. When Lady Cordelia called one afternoon, he met her at the door and did not invite her in. "My wife and I are occupied," he said, and closed it gently. Cordelia's face, furious and disbelieving, was a memory Seraphina treasured. They walked the gardens together and he told her about Elowen. The stories were painful, but he shared them, and in the sharing, the locked room ceased to be a shrine and became a place of memory rather than torment. One spring day, Seraphina placed fresh flowers beneath the portrait. Cassian watched and did not turn away. The village school flourished. Cassian funded a new roof, new books, a second teacher. He sometimes visited, standing awkwardly at the back of the room while Seraphina taught. The children giggled at the sight of the stern Duke trying to fit his large frame into a tiny chair. He bore it with surprising grace. On the first anniversary of her arrival at Ravencroft, Seraphina stood in the garden as dusk fell. The roses she had planted bloomed in soft pinks and whites. Cassian came up behind her, his footsteps quiet on the grass. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that a year ago, I believed I would never be happy here, that I would always be a ghost in this house. And now—" She turned to face him, the sunset painted gold across her features. "Now I am home." He took her hand and pressed it to his heart. She could feel the steady beat beneath his waistcoat, the heart that had once been a fortress and was now a garden, open and blooming. "I loved you too late," he murmured, "but I will love you well." She leaned into him and his arms closed around her. The wind stirred the roses, and somewhere in the house, a portrait of a dark-haired girl seemed to smile. Time passed, as time always does, and the wounds that had seemed permanent began to scar over and fade. A year after their reconciliation, Seraphina gave birth to a daughter in the bedchamber she had once thought of as a lonely cell. The child had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark curls. Cassian held the baby with hands that had once signed a revenge plot and now trembled with awe. They named her Elowen. The old room in the east wing was opened and aired. The portrait stayed, but new light streamed through the windows. Seraphina sometimes took the baby there, rocking her in a chair by the hearth, telling her stories of the aunt she would never meet but would always know. Harold Greaves lived to see his granddaughter take her first steps. He died peacefully 2 years later, his name cleared, his daughter loved, his legacy redeemed. Cassian held Seraphina at the funeral and whispered, "He knew peace at the end. That is because of you." Julian married a gentle woman from the next county and remained the family's dearest friend. He never missed a harvest festival. And the Duke and Duchess of Ravencroft walked through their gardens, hand in hand, watching their daughter chase butterflies. The past was not forgotten. Some scars never fully fade, but it no longer ruled them. One evening, as the stars came out, Cassian pulled Seraphina close. "I was a man drowning in darkness," he said. "You were the light I tried to extinguish, and you saved me anyway." She smiled and kissed his cheek. "We saved each other." In the house behind them, the windows glowed warm. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. A little girl's voice called for her papa. And in the portrait gallery next to the painting of Lady Aloan hung a new portrait. A family of 3, sitting together in a garden of roses, their faces full of a hard-won and beautiful peace.